the weight of expectations. The morning sun glinted off the steel and glass facade of Reynolds Innovations, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of downtown Seattle. Dominic Reynolds, founder and CEO of the multi-billion-dollar tech empire, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his reflection staring back at him with the same cold intensity that had intimidated countless business rivals. "The Singapore investors will be here in 30 minutes, Mr. Reynolds," came the soft voice from the doorway. Dominic didn't turn around. "And the presentation files?" "Updated with the latest quarterly projections and loaded onto all devices." "I've also prepared physical copies as backups," Fiona Winters replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders. Dominic finally turned, his sharp eyes taking in his executive assistant. Fiona stood perfectly poised. In a modest charcoal suit, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun, not a strand out of place despite having arrived at the office 3 hours earlier than anyone else, including him. "The legal department sent over the contract revisions 10 minutes ago. I've highlighted the concerning clauses on page 17, she continued, placing a folder on his desk. Dominic flipped through it, frowning. "They're still pushing for those royalty terms? Unacceptable." "I took the liberty of drafting alternative language," Fiona said, pointing to a sticky note on the back pages. "Based on your position during the last negotiation." For a moment, Dominic's expression softened slightly. It was precisely what he would have suggested. As always, Fiona had anticipated his needs before he could voice them. But the moment passed quickly, and his features hardened again. "Fine. Make sure the conference room is set up properly this time. Last week's lighting was atrocious." If the criticism stung, Fiona didn't show it. "Of course. I've already spoken with facilities. Everything will be perfect." As she turned to leave, Dominic added, "And Fiona, I need the Henderson file review completed by this evening." She paused at the door. The Henderson review was a massive undertaking, one that would normally require days to complete. Combined with the investor meeting preparations, it meant another night without sleep. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds," she replied without hesitation. When she left, Dominic returned to staring out the window, unaware of the quiet sigh that escaped Fiona's lips as she closed the door. For 3 years, Fiona Winters had been the invisible force that kept Reynolds Innovations, and Dominic himself, functioning flawlessly. Her day began at 4:30 a.m. and often ended well past midnight. Weekends were merely extensions of weekdays. Holidays were opportunities to catch up on work while others celebrated. At her desk, Fiona quickly reviewed the final details for the Singapore meeting while simultaneously responding to urgent emails. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from department heads seeking her advice, not Dominic's, on how to approach the temperamental CEO with their problems. "Another impossible day?" asked Garrett, the head of marketing, stopping by her desk. Fiona managed a small smile. "Just busy." "You know there are other companies that wouldn't treat you like a machine," Garrett said quietly. "Places where talent like yours would be appreciated." "I'm fine, really," she insisted, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. The truth was more complicated than exhaustion. Despite Dominic's coldness, Fiona had seen glimpses of something else. Moments of brilliance and vision that had initially drawn her to work for him. She'd watched him donate millions to education programs without seeking publicity. She'd seen him sit for hours with young engineers, mentoring them with unexpected patience. Those rare moments kept her holding on, hoping that someday the man who could show such kindness to strangers might recognize the same in those closest to him. As the investors arrived and the meeting began, Fiona worked silently in the background, anticipating needs, smoothing tensions, and ensuring everything proceeded perfectly. When Dominic made a small error in his figures, she discreetly slid a corrected note in front of him, saving him from embarrassment. He never acknowledged it, not with a glance, not with a word. To him, It was simply expected. To Fiona, it was another small weight added to the invisible burden she carried. Little did either of them know that by tomorrow, everything would change. The breaking point. The conference room hummed with tension as 20 executives and board members gathered for the quarterly strategy meeting. Rain pelted against the windows, matching the stormy atmosphere inside. Dominic Reynolds stood at the head of the table, his piercing gaze sweeping across the room as the company's leadership team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The Horizon project is 6 weeks behind schedule and over budget by $20 million, Dominic stated, his voice cutting through the silence. "Someone explain why I shouldn't fire the entire development team." Fiona stood discreetly in the corner, tablet in hand, ready to provide any information needed. She had been up until 3 a.m. preparing detailed analysis reports on the project delays, having identified the actual problems, unrealistic deadlines, and resource allocation issues that Dominic himself had insisted upon against the recommendations of his team. Julian Parker, the company's CTO, cleared his throat. "If I may, Dominic, the technical challenges we've encountered were—" "Excuses," Dominic interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. "I want solutions, not excuses. The solutions are—" "In the report I circulated yesterday," Julian replied, glancing toward Fiona with a silent plea for support. Dominic flipped through the pages in front of him with growing irritation. "This report is useless. Where's the financial impact analysis? Where are the contingency plans?" Fiona stepped forward. "Mr. Reynolds, if you look at Appendix C, you'll find the complete financial breakdown and 3 proposed recovery strategies. I've highlighted the recommended approach based on your priority metrics." Dominic turned to the appendix, his scowl deepening as he scanned the pages. The room fell, silent as everyone watched him read. After a long moment, he looked up, not at Fiona, but at the presentation screen. "Let's move on to the Singapore deal," he said abruptly. "The presentation should be ready." Fiona stepped forward to connect her tablet to the projector. As she did, a notification popped up on the screen, a critical email from the legal department regarding the Singapore contract. She quickly dismissed it, making a mental note to address it immediately after the meeting. "Today, please," Dominic said sharply. The presentation began smoothly, with Dominic walking the board through the expansion strategy for the Asian market. Everything was proceeding according to plan until slide 15, a slide containing the final projections for the 5-year growth plan. "This is wrong," Dominic said suddenly, staring at the numbers. "These figures don't match what I approved." Yesterday, Fiona's heart sank. She had updated the presentation with the revised projections that Dominic had sent at midnight, numbers that were significantly more aggressive than what the finance team had recommended. "I used the updated projections you sent last night, sir," she explained quietly. Dominic's eyes narrowed. "I never sent updated projections." Fiona pulled out her phone, quickly checking her emails. There it was, an email from Dominic's account with the revised numbers. But as she looked closer, she realized with horror that it wasn't from Dominic's primary account, but his secondary one, which his nephew occasionally used when helping with research. The nephew must have made changes without authorization. Before she could explain, Dominic turned to the board. "It appears my assistant has taken it upon herself to alter our growth projections without approval." "I didn't," Fiona began, but Dominic cut her off. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he continued, his voice rising. "This kind of carelessness could have cost us millions if presented to our investors." The board members shifted uncomfortably, averting their eyes from the public dressing down. Julian attempted to intervene. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Dominic interrupted. "This needs to be addressed now. Ms. Winters has been making an alarming number of errors lately. The Henderson file was incomplete. The contract revisions were late. And now this." Each accusation hit Fiona like a physical blow. The Henderson file had been incomplete because Dominic had changed the requirements 3 times in 24 hours. The contract revisions had been late because she'd been handling an emergency with his personal investment portfolio that he'd forgotten about. "I apologize for any confusion," she said, maintaining her professional composure despite the burning humiliation. "If you'll allow me to explain—" "What's to explain?" Dominic's voice was cold. "After 3 years, I expected better. Perhaps I've been too lenient. Anyone in this company is replaceable, Ms. Winters. Even you." The words hung in the air. 20 pairs of eyes watched as color drained from Fiona's face. For 3 years, she had given everything to this company, to this man. Missed her sister's wedding, postponed her father's surgery to handle a crisis at work, ended relationships because partners couldn't understand her dedication. All for a man who thought she was replaceable. Something broke inside her. A dam that had been holding back 3 years of exhaustion, frustration, and unacknowledged sacrifice. With trembling hands, Fiona disconnected her tablet from the projector. "You're right, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Anyone is replaceable." She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at him for perhaps the first time in their professional relationship. "Including me. I quit." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Dominic's expression shifted from anger to shock. "Don't be dramatic," he said dismissively. "We'll discuss this later." "There's nothing to discuss," Fiona replied, gathering her belongings. "I'll have my resignation letter on your desk within the hour. I'll complete a handover document for my replacement." As she walked toward the door, dignity intact despite the tears threatening to spill, she stopped and turned. "For the record, the email with the altered projections came from your nephew's account, not yours. The evidence is in my inbox if anyone cares to verify." With that, she walked out, closing the door quietly behind her. The silence in the conference room was deafening. Dominic stared at the closed door, an unfamiliar feeling creeping through his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even annoyance. It was panic. Hollow victory. The meeting adjourned early, dissolving into uncomfortable murmurs after Fiona's departure. Dominic stalked back to his office, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the frosted glass. The sudden silence was disorienting. No gentle knock announcing his next appointment, no perfectly timed coffee appearing on his desk, no soft voice reminding him of pending calls. Just silence and a pristine resignation letter centered perfectly on his desk. He snatched it up, scanning the professionally worded paragraphs. No emotion, no accusations, just clinical statements about her immediate departure and the comprehensive transition documents she'd prepared. At the bottom, her elegant signature, Fiona Winters. "Ridiculous," he muttered, crumpling the letter and tossing it toward the trash. He missed. Somehow that small failure irritated him more than anything else. His intercom buzzed. "What?" he barked. "Sir, it's Julian Parker. May I come in?" Dominic sighed. "Make it quick." Julian entered, his usually calm demeanor replaced with barely concealed anger. "That was completely unwarranted," he said without preamble. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I manage my staff," Dominic replied coldly. "Staff?" Julian shook his head. "Fiona wasn't just staff, Dominic. She was the backbone of this entire operation. Do you have any idea what that woman has done for you, for all of us? She made a critical error that could have—" "She didn't make any error," Julian interrupted, tossing a printed email onto Dominic's desk. "I checked. Your nephew sent these projections from your secondary account. Fiona was following your apparent instructions to the letter as she always does." Dominic stared at the printout, a sinking feeling growing in his stomach. "Thomas shouldn't have access to—" "The point is," Julian continued, "you publicly humiliated the most dedicated employee this company has ever had. without even checking the facts first. Dominic's jaw tightened. I'll speak with her tomorrow when things have cooled down. Julian laughed humorlessly. You really don't get it, do you? She's gone, Dominic. Security called up. She's already turned in her badge and left the building. That's absurd. She's worked here for 3 years. She wouldn't just walk out. After what you said to her, I'm surprised it took this long. Julian moved toward the door, then paused. You know, you might want to check her handover documents. I have a feeling you're about to discover exactly how much Fiona did around here that you never noticed. After Julian left, Dominic sat in silence, staring at the email printout. A notification pinged on his computer, Fiona's final email containing links to all her transition documents. Against his better judgment, he clicked. What unfolded before him was staggering. Spreadsheets tracking hundreds of ongoing projects. Detailed profiles on every employee, noting their strengths, challenges, and personal situations that might affect their work. A calendar system, managing not just his business obligations, but personal reminders. His mother's birthday, his annual, physical, even maintenance schedules for his vacation properties. He clicked another folder labeled Contingency Plans and found meticulously organized documents for every conceivable crisis. Media scandals, product failures, market crashes, even succession plans if something happened to him. Hours passed as Dominic dove deeper into Fiona's digital legacy. He discovered she'd been quietly mediating conflicts between department heads, preventing territorial disputes from ever reaching his desk. She'd identified and mentored promising employees who'd gone on to become key team leaders. She'd even drafted most of the speeches he'd been praised for, capturing his vision while softening his abrasive tendencies. As night fell over Seattle, Dominic stumbled upon a folder simply labeled DR. Inside were dozens of files documenting instances where she'd covered for his mistakes. The presentation to Japanese investors where she'd quietly corrected his cultural faux pas. The time she'd rewritten an inflammatory email he'd sent to the board chairman while angry. The charity gala where she'd paid the bartender from her own pocket to water down his drinks when he was close to making a scene. But most damning was a subfolder containing correspondence with his ex-wife Rebecca. Emails showed that Fiona had been quietly facilitating communication between them after their bitter divorce, ensuring his alimony payments were made on time, and helping coordinate his visits with his daughter Emma, visits he frequently forgot or rescheduled. A separate document tracked Emma's school events and achievements. With growing horror, Dominic realized Fiona had been sending birthday and Christmas gifts to his daughter on his behalf for years, maintaining the fiction that he remembered these occasions. His phone rang. Rebecca's number. "What do you want?" he answered gruffly. "Well, hello to you too, Dominic." Rebecca's voice was tight. "Emma's recital is tomorrow night. She's playing first chair violin. I wanted to confirm you're still coming, since Fiona's not answering my texts." Dominic froze. Emma plays violin? The silence on the other end was deafening. "Wow," Rebecca finally said. "Just wow, Dominic. She's been playing for 3 years. Fiona sends me updates about your schedule every week to coordinate these events. She's the one who sent flowers after Emma's last performance, the ones Emma thinks came from you." The truth crashed down on him like a physical weight. "I'll be there," he said quietly. "Will you? Without Fiona to remind you?" Rebecca sighed. "You know what? Don't bother. It's better for Emma if you don't show up at all than if you arrive late and distracted, checking your phone the whole time." "Rebecca, goodbye, Dominic." The line went dead. Dominic stared at his phone, then back at his computer screen where a photo of Emma holding a violin was open in one of Fiona's files. His daughter looked so much older than he remembered. He clicked back to the main directory and found one final folder he hadn't opened, labeled Personal Notes. Inside was a single document. He hesitated, then clicked. It was a journal of sorts, Fiona's private observations about working with him. Unlike everything else, these weren't clinical or professional. They were deeply personal. Dominic shouted at the development team again today. They're terrified of him, but I see what they don't. The way his hands shake afterward, how he stares out the window when everyone leaves. He hates being feared, but doesn't know another way to lead. And later, he donated $5 million to the Children's Hospital anonymously today. Asked me to ensure no one ever found out. There's such goodness in him, buried under all that armor. The final entry was from just 3 days ago. 3 years today. Sometimes I wonder if he even knows what day I started. Sometimes I wonder why I stay when he never sees me. But then he'll do something. A moment of unexpected kindness, a flash of the person I believe he could be. And I remember. I stay because someone needs to believe in the man he could become, even if he doesn't believe it himself. Dominic closed the file, a hollow feeling expanding in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt something that took him a moment to identify. Shame. The victory he'd built, the empire, the fortune, the power, suddenly felt empty. Because the one person who had seen him, truly seen him, both his flaws and his potential, was gone, and he had driven her away. The search for redemption morning arrived with a harsh clarity that sleep deprivation only intensified. Dominic hadn't left his office, spending the night poring through Fiona's meticulous records. His usual immaculate appearance had given way to rumpled clothes and stubble, his eyes bloodshot from both exhaustion and an emotion he rarely experienced: regret. The familiar rhythm of the office starting its day sounded wrong without Fiona's quiet efficiency directing it. At 7:30, his office door opened without the customary knock. "You look terrible," remarked Naomi Wilson, the HR director, surveying him with frank disapproval. Dominic didn't bother denying it. "I need to find her." "Fiona?" Naomi crossed her arms. "Why? So you can berate her again?" "I need to apologize," he said quietly. Naomi's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. "Well, that's a first," she sighed. "I don't know where she is, and even if I did, I'm not sure I'd tell you. That woman deserves better than what she got here." "I know that now," Dominic admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Something in his tone must have conveyed his sincerity because Naomi's expression softened slightly. "Look, I can't help you find her, but her friend Priya in accounting might know something." 20 minutes later, Dominic stood awkwardly at Priya Sharma's desk, enduring the shocked stares of employees who had never seen their CEO venture to the lower floors. "Mr. Reynolds," Priya said coolly, "what can I do for you?" "I need to speak with Fiona. It's important." Priya regarded him skeptically. "I imagine it is. For you." "Please," he said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "I just want to apologize." "That would be a change," Priya replied, but her expression wavered. "She's staying at her sister's place in Bellevue. That's all I'm saying." It wasn't much, but it was a start. After a quick search through Fiona's employee records, Dominic had an address for her sister, Jessica Winters. By noon, he was pulling his Aston Martin into a modest suburban neighborhood, a place he wouldn't normally be caught dead visiting. The 2-story home, with its neatly trimmed lawn and cheerful flower beds, seemed to radiate the warmth that his glass and steel penthouse lacked. Dominic sat in his car for several minutes, rehearsing what he would say. Nothing sounded right. Nothing could possibly make up for years of taking her for granted, culminating in that public humiliation. Finally, he approached the door and knocked. A woman who bore a striking resemblance to Fiona opened it, her expression changing from polite curiosity to cold recognition. "You've got to be kidding me," Jessica said flatly. "Is Fiona here?" Dominic asked. "Why would I tell you that?" Jessica crossed her arms. So you can crush what's left of her spirit? I made a terrible mistake. Which one? Treating her like a robot for 3 years or publicly humiliating her for something that wasn't her fault? Dominic winced. Both. All of it. I need to tell her how sorry I am. Jessica studied him, taking in his disheveled appearance and the shadows under his eyes. She's not here, she finally said. She left this morning, said she needed to clear her head. Do you know where she went? Even if I did, why would I tell the man who made my sister cry herself to sleep last night? The image of Fiona crying hit Dominic like a physical blow. I never meant to hurt her. That's the problem with people like you, Jessica said. You never mean to hurt anyone, but you're so wrapped up in yourselves that you don't notice the damage you cause until it's too late. She started to close the door. Wait, Dominic said desperately. Please, just tell me if she's all right. Jessica paused. She's stronger than you give her credit for. She'll be fine. Without you. The door closed with finality, leaving Dominic standing on the porch, feeling more lost than he had in years. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Emma's violin recital at 7:00 p.m. A reminder Fiona had set before she left. On impulse, he called Julian. Did you find her? Julian asked without preamble. No. Her sister wouldn't tell me where she went. Dominic hesitated. Julian, did you know my daughter plays violin? Everyone knows that, Julian replied. Fiona organized an office collection for Emma's music camp last summer. She showed us videos of Emma playing. The revelation struck another blow to Dominic's self-image. His entire staff knew more about his daughter than he did. Her recital is tonight, Dominic said quietly. Are you going? Julian sounded surprised. I shouldn't I? It would be a start. After hanging up, Dominic drove aimlessly, his mind churning. He found himself at Westlake Park, where he and Rebecca used to bring Emma when she was small. On a whim, he parked and walked through the urban plaza, watching families and couples enjoying the afternoon sunshine. A familiar figure caught his eye. A woman sitting alone on a bench, staring at the fountain. Her auburn hair was down, falling in loose waves around her shoulders instead of its usual tight bun. She looked different in jeans and a simple blouse instead of her formal business attire, yet unmistakably Fiona. Dominic approached slowly, giving her plenty of time to notice him and leave if she wanted. She looked up as his shadow fell across the bench, her expression guarded. How did you find me? She asked. I didn't, he admitted. Not intentionally. I was just wandering. She nodded slightly, then returned her gaze to the fountain. May, He gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. He sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. I went through your files last night, he said after a long silence. I'm sure the transition documents will be helpful for whoever replaces me, she replied formally. That's not what I meant. Dominic stared at his hands. I saw everything, Fiona. All the things you did that I never acknowledged. All the times. You covered for me. The gifts you sent to Emma on my behalf. Fiona's breath caught slightly, but she didn't speak. I had no idea, he continued, about any of it. About how much I've been relying on you, not just professionally, but personally. I didn't realize how much you've been holding together. It was my job, she said quietly. No, Dominic shook his head. It wasn't. Not sending birthday gifts to my daughter. Not covering for me when I was being an ass. Not, his voice faltered. Not seeing the good in me when I couldn't see it myself. Fiona turned to look at him then, her eyes widening slightly. You read my personal notes, she realized. I did, he admitted. I'm sorry for invading your privacy. I'm sorry for a lot of things. A tense silence stretched between them. In the distance, Children laughed as they chased each other around the fountain. Emma's recital is tonight, Dominic said finally. Did you know? Fiona nodded. I set up the reminder before I left. I'm going to go, he said. I should be there for her. Yes, you should, Fiona agreed, a hint of approval warming her voice. Dominic gathered his courage. Would you come with me? Not as my assistant, he added quickly. As someone who actually knows my daughter, someone who cares about her. Fiona studied him, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she found made her shoulders relax slightly. Why are you really here, Dominic? She asked softly. It was the first time she'd ever called him by his first name. The sound of it made something shift inside him. Because I've been wrong, he said simply. About everything that matters. And I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. A tear slipped down Fiona's cheek, catching the afternoon sunlight. Unlike the tears of humiliation from the meeting room, this one seemed to carry a different weight. Perhaps hope, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps something neither of them was ready to name. The recital starts at 7, she said finally. I'll meet you there. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Dominic Reynolds felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. It felt remarkably like gratitude. New beginnings, the auditorium of Westlake Academy, buzzed with the anticipatory murmurs of proud parents and nervous performers. Dominic arrived early, dressed not in his usual power suit, but in a simple charcoal sweater and slacks, clothes he'd almost forgotten he owned. He'd even stopped to purchase flowers, a small bouquet of yellow daisies that the florist assured him were appropriate for the occasion. He scanned the filling seats anxiously until he spotted Fiona near the middle section. She'd changed into a simple blue dress, her hair partially pulled back with soft tendrils framing her face. She looked up as he approached, a mixture of surprise and approval crossing her features. You came, she said, moving her purse to make room for him. I said I would. Dominic sat beside her, acutely aware of how different this felt from their professional proximity of the past 3 years. Rebecca texted me, Fiona admitted. She was convinced you wouldn't show. I almost didn't, he confessed. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid? You? Fiona looked genuinely shocked. I've seen you face down hostile takeovers without blinking. Business is easy, Dominic said quietly. It's just strategy and numbers. But this... He gestured vaguely around the auditorium. This is real. This is my daughter who barely knows. Me. Who I've let down so many times that her mother assumes I won't show up. How do I even begin to fix that? Fiona's expression softened. By showing up. That's the first step. Before he could respond, Rebecca appeared at the end of their row. She did a double take at seeing Dominic, her surprise quickly masked by cool civility. You made it, she said, sliding into the seat beside him. And you brought Fiona. That makes sense. The implied criticism wasn't lost on him, but Dominic chose not to rise to it. Emma doesn't know I'm here? I didn't tell her, Rebecca confirmed. Easier to manage disappointment that way. Dominic nodded, accepting the harsh truth in her words. I'm trying to change that, Rebecca. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The lights dimmed, saving him from further conversation. The middle school orchestra filed onto the stage, a collection of nervous 12- and 13-year-olds clutching their instruments. Dominic scanned their faces until he found Emma, taller. Then he remembered, with Rebecca's delicate features and his own determined chin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she moved with a quiet confidence as she took the first chair position. She looks like you, Fiona whispered. She looks better than me, Dominic replied softly. Stronger? The conductor appeared, and the audience fell silent. As the first notes filled the auditorium, Dominic found himself transfixed. Emma played with a passion and precision that left him breathless. Her face transformed as she drew the bow across the strings, revealing a depth of feeling he'd never taken the time to discover. "She's incredible," he whispered, emotion making his voice rough. "She practices 3 hours every day," Fiona murmured. "She wants to apply to Juilliard eventually." Dominic turned to her, stunned. "Juilliard? I had no idea." "There's a lot you don't know about her," Rebecca interjected quietly. "But you could, if you tried." The simple truth of those words settled heavily on his shoulders. As the orchestra played on, Dominic watched his daughter, really saw her, perhaps for the first time. When they finished their final piece, he was the first on his feet, applauding until his palms hurt. After the performance, the auditorium emptied into the reception hall where proud parents congratulated their children. Dominic stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, the bouquet of daisies clutched in his hand. "She'll be out in a minute," Rebecca said, appearing beside him. After a pause, she added, "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to her. Even though she didn't know I was coming. She always hopes, Dominic, every time." The simple statement carried the weight of years of disappointment. Before he could respond, Emma emerged from the backstage area, still carrying her violin case. She spotted her mother and started forward, then froze when she saw Dominic. "Dad?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Hello, Emma." He stepped forward, holding out the flowers awkwardly. "You were amazing tonight." She took the flowers slowly, as if afraid they might disappear. "You came. You actually came." "I did." He nodded, his throat tight. "I'm sorry I've missed so much, but I'd like to change that, if you'll let me." Emma looked from the flowers to her father, then over his shoulder where Fiona stood a few paces back. "Miss Winters, you came too." Her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I wouldn't have missed it," Fiona smiled warmly. Emma turned back to Dominic, her expression curious. "Are you here together?" The question hung in the air between them. Dominic glanced at Fiona, then back at his daughter. "We're figuring that out," he said honestly. Emma seemed to consider this, then nodded with the serious acceptance only 13-year-olds can manage. "Good. I like Ms. Winters. She always remembers the things that matter." The truth in those simple words struck Dominic deeply. He'd spent years focusing on acquisitions and profit margins while forgetting the people, the relationships that truly mattered. "She does," he agreed softly. "I'm learning that." Later, after promising Emma he would attend her next performance and scheduling a proper weekend visit, Dominic walked Fiona to her car. "Thank you," he said as they reached the small sedan, another detail of her life he'd never bothered to learn about, "for coming tonight. For everything." Fiona leaned against her car, studying him in the soft glow of the parking lot lights. "What happens tomorrow, Dominic? You go back to being the demanding CEO and I go... where, exactly?" It was the question he'd been wrestling with since finding her in the park. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know I don't want to go back to how things were. Not with Emma. Not with you." "I can't be your assistant again," Fiona said firmly. "Not after everything." "I don't want you to be my assistant," Dominic replied. "You were never just that, even when I was too blind to see it." He took a deep breath. "The company needs restructuring. I've been thinking about creating a new position, Chief of Operations, someone who would work alongside me, not under me." "Equal authority, equal respect." Fiona's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a promotion?" "I'm offering you the recognition you've always deserved," he corrected. "But more importantly, I'm asking for a chance to show you who I can be when I'm not hiding behind walls of arrogance and fear." "Fear?" she questioned softly. "Of failing, of being vulnerable, of needing someone." His voice dropped. "Of how I feel when I'm with you. The admission hung in the night air between them, more honest than anything he'd said in years. Fiona was quiet for a long moment. "I can't give you an answer tonight," she finally said. "About the job or anything else." "I need time. I understand." Dominic nodded, fighting disappointment. "I've given you every reason to doubt me." "It's not about doubt," she corrected gently. "It's about making sure whatever comes next isn't built on the same foundation as before. We both deserve better than that." "We do," he agreed. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." As she opened her car door, Dominic added, "For what it's worth, I think the man you believed I could be, the one you wrote about in your notes, I think he might exist after all. I'd like the chance to find him." Fiona's smile was soft in the dim light. "I've always known he existed, Dominic. That's why I stayed so long." 3 months later, the executive floor of Reynolds Innovations looked markedly different. The intimidating steel and glass had been softened with plants and more comfortable seating. Dominic's office door stayed open more often than not, and employees no longer lowered their voices when walking past. Inside that office, Dominic and Fiona sat across from each other, reviewing quarterly projections. 2 coffee cups sat on the desk between them, one black, one with a splash of cream, both placed there by Dominic himself. "The Singapore expansion is ahead of schedule," Fiona noted, highlighting a section on her tablet. "Julian's team delivered the platform update early." "Turns out people work better when they're not terrified of their boss," Dominic remarked wryly. "Who knew?" Fiona laughed, a sound that had become wonderfully common in recent weeks. "Speaking of schedules, don't forget Emma's orchestra is playing at the Seattle Symphony benefit next weekend." "Already in my calendar," Dominic replied proudly. "I've only missed one of her performances in the last 3 months, and that was because of the Tokyo emergency." "Which you apologized for properly," Fiona pointed out. "With an actual phone call instead of a text, if I recall." "I'm learning," he said with a smile. "Slowly, but I'm learning." Their professional relationship had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined. As chief operations officer, Fiona had brought humanity to the company's cutthroat culture. As for their personal relationship, that was evolving too, with careful steps and newfound respect. "Dinner tonight?" Dominic asked, trying to sound casual. "There's a new place on Lake Union that's supposed to be excellent." "Our 3rd date this week," Fiona observed with a raised eyebrow. "People will talk." "Let them," he replied simply. She smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes in a way that still made his heart skip. "Pick me up at 7. As she gathered her things to leave, Dominic caught her hand gently. "Fiona, I've been thinking—" "A dangerous pastime," she teased. "I'm serious," he said, though his lips quirked upward. "These past months, working together, rebuilding everything, it's shown me what's possible when I stop getting in my own way." Fiona's expression softened as she recognized his tone. "And what have you concluded from this dangerous thinking?" "That I'm falling in love with you," Dominic said simply. "Not with my assistant who made my life easier, but with the woman who saw through my walls and had the courage to walk away when I couldn't see her value." Fiona's breath caught. For a moment she was silent, her eyes searching his face for any trace of the old Dominic, the one who used people without seeing them. Finding none, she leaned forward and brushed her lips gently against his. "Took you long enough," she whispered against his mouth. As he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, Dominic reflected on how completely his life had transformed since that fateful meeting. He had lost an assistant but found his heart. He had reconnected with his daughter. He had discovered that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but its own kind of strength. And all it had taken was the courage of one woman who refused to be invisible, whose tears had washed away his blindness and shown him what truly mattered. Not power, not wealth, not control, but being truly seen, and seeing others in return.